There are documents that should never be found. Papers that once seen cannot be unseen. Words written in ink that reveal truths so disturbing they change everything you thought you knew about the world around you. This is the story of one such document. A ledger. A simple, leather-bound book filled with names, dates, and numbers. The kind of record any plantation might keep to track inventory, expenses, purchases. But this ledger was different. It was hidden deliberately, carefully behind a false panel, in a locked desk in a room no one was permitted to enter. And when it was finally discovered, on a sweltering August afternoon in 1854, it revealed something far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Something that would put lives in danger. Something that would force people to flee in the dead of night. Something that powerful men would kill to keep secret. Because some lists aren't meant to document what happened. They're meant to document what was done and to whom. The heat rose from the dirt road in visible waves, distorting the landscape like water over glass. Elias Thorne wiped the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief that had long since become useless, soaked through with the humidity that clung to everything in Louisiana's late summer. The small carriage bounced along the rooted path, its wheels creaking with each jolt, kicking up clouds of dust that settled on his dark wool coat like a second skin. He had been traveling for 3 days. 3 days from Richmond, where he had worked as a bookkeeper for the Carmichael Shipping Company. 3 days to reach this remote corner of Louisiana, where the cypress trees grew so thick that sunlight barely penetrated their canopy and the air smelled of decay and wet earth. 3 days to reach Plantation. The name meant beautiful dream in French. But as the manor house came into view through the tunnel of ancient oak trees draped with Spanish moss, Elias thought it looked more like something from a fever dream. The once white columns were stained with mildew. Paint peeled from the shutters in long, curling strips. Weeds grew up through the brick pathway that led to the front entrance. This is it. Elias asked the driver, a weathered man who had spoken perhaps 10 words during the entire journey. Belrave, the man confirmed, his voice flat. Home of the late Dr. Alistair Dubois. Late, the word hung in the air between them. Dr. Alistair Dubois. Dubois had died 6 weeks ago. A riding accident. According to the letter Elias had received from the estate's attorney, the doctor's horse had thrown him during a morning ride. He'd struck his head on a stone marker at the edge of the property, dead before anyone found him. The estate needed someone to organize the deceased's financial records and prepare an accounting for the heirs. Elias had been recommended by a colleague in Richmond, a man who had worked with Dubois years ago when the doctor still practiced medicine in New Orleans. Quick work, the attorney's letter had promised. 2 weeks at most, the estate will compensate you generously. Elias needed the money. His mother in Richmond required constant medical care and bookkeeper's wages barely covered her expenses. This job offered 3 months' salary for 2 weeks of work. He couldn't refuse, but as he stepped down from the carriage and felt his boots sink slightly into the soft, damp earth, something coiled tight in his stomach. An instinct, a whisper in his mind that said, "Turn around. Leave. Get back in that carriage and go home." He ignored it. The front door opened before he could knock. A tall, thin man with sunken cheeks and eyes, like chips of slate, stood in the doorway. He wore the clothing of an overseer, rough cotton shirt, worn leather vest, boots caked with dried mud. "You the bookkeeper?" the man asked. His voice was rough, like gravel scraping against wood. "Elias Thorne." "Yes, I'm here too. I know why you're here." The man stepped aside, gesturing impatiently for Elias to enter. "Name's Silas Croft. I manage the property. Managed it for Dr. Dubois for 15 years. Elias stepped into the entrance hall. It smelled of mildew and something else, something sweet and rotten like fruit, left too long in the sun. The wallpaper was peeling. Water stains darkened the ceiling in brown patches. A grand staircase curved up to the 2nd floor, its banister covered in a fine layer of dust. "The doctor's study is upstairs," Croft said, already moving toward the staircase. Everything you need is in there. Papers, ledgers, correspondence, all of it. What about the household accounts? I'll need to review. All in the study. Croft's tone made it clear he had no interest in conversation. I'll have someone bring your trunk up. You'll stay in the East Wing. Meals are at 7 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening. Don't wander the grounds after dark. The paths are uneven, and there are sinkholes near the cypress groves. It sounded like a warning. Elias followed Croft up the stairs. The wood groaned under their weight. As they reached the landing, Elias noticed something odd. A dark stain on the wall about chest height. It looked like something had been removed. A painting, perhaps, but the outline was strange, irregular. What was there? Elias asked, pointing to the mark. Croft didn't turn around. Mirror broke during the funeral. Bad luck to keep broken mirrors. They continued down a long hallway. Oil lamps hung from the walls unlit. Even in daylight, the corridor was dim. The windows too few and too small to let in much sun. Doors lined both sides, all closed, all silent. At the end of the hall, Croft stopped before a heavy oak door. He produced a key from his pocket and unlocked it, pushing the door open with a creak. "Doctor's study," he announced. The room was larger than Elias expected. Bookshelves lined 3 walls packed with leather-bound volumes. A massive desk dominated the center of the space, its surface covered with papers, books, and correspondence. More papers were stacked on the floor. A filing cabinet stood in one corner, its drawers slightly open. The window behind the desk looked out over the back of the property, fields that stretched toward a dark line of trees in the distance. "You'll have privacy here," Croft said. "No one will disturb you. What about the household staff? I may need to speak with. There is no household staff." Croft's voice was sharp. "Not anymore. Dr. Dubois lived alone in his final years. I manage the field operations. That's all that remains." Elias frowned. "But surely there's a cook, a housekeeper. Meals are brought up from my quarters." Croft was already turning to leave. "Like I said, everything you need is in this room. Do your work and stay out of the way. We'll all be better for it." Before Elias could respond, Croft was gone, his boots echoing down the hallway. Alone in the study, Elias took a slow breath. The air felt heavy, oppressive. He moved to the window and opened it, hoping for a breeze, but the air outside was just as still and thick. He turned back to the desk. Time to begin. The work was exactly what Elias had expected: tedious, meticulous, and time-consuming. Dr. Dubois, it seemed, had been a man of obsessive organization in some areas and complete chaos in others. The plantation's financial records were immaculate. Every expense was logged, every purchase documented. Receipts dating back 20 years were filed chronologically in labeled folders. But his personal correspondence was a disaster. Letters were stuffed into drawers with no apparent system. Some were opened, some weren't. Bills of sale were mixed with personal notes. Medical journals were stacked on top of legal documents. Elias spent the first day simply sorting everything into categories. By evening, his back ached from hunching over the desk. His eyes burned from reading faded handwriting by lamplight. When the knock came at the door, announcing dinner, he nearly wept with relief. The meal was brought by a young woman, perhaps 16 or 17, who entered without speaking, set the tray on a small side table, and left immediately. She didn't make eye contact, didn't acknowledge his thanks. The food was simple but adequate. Cornbread, beans, a piece of salted pork. Elias ate mechanically, his mind still turning over what he'd found in the files. The plantation's records showed declining profits over the past decade. Dr. Dubois had sold off portions of the property. The workforce had been reduced significantly. Several structures, a carriage house, a smokehouse, what was labeled as a guest cottage, had been demolished, and there were large unexplained expenses. Payments to suppliers in New Orleans, no description of what was purchased, just amounts, some quite substantial payments to individuals, no names, just initials. To RC for consultation, $300. To JM for discretion, $500. Discretion, an odd word choice. Elias made notes in his journal, questions to investigate further. As darkness fell completely, the room grew colder, despite the summer heat. He lit more lamps, but they seemed only to deepen the shadows in the corners. Around 10 o'clock he heard it, a sound, faint, rhythmic. Thump, thump, thump. He paused, pen hovering over paper, listening. It came from below, or perhaps beside. It was hard to tell in this old house, where sound seemed to travel through the walls in strange ways. Thump, 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 thump. He rose and moved to the door, opening it into the dark hallway. The lamps had been extinguished. No light came from under any of the other doors. The sound had stopped. He stood there for a long moment, listening to the silence. Then, just as he was about to close the door, creak. The sound of weight on old floorboards coming from down the hall. "Hello," Elias called out. His voice sounded thin, swallowed by the darkness. No response. He waited, heart beating faster than he liked to admit. Then he heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving away from him toward the stairs. He grabbed a lamp from the study and stepped into the hallway. Mr. Steady, and stepped into the hallway. Croft, is someone there? The footsteps stopped. Elias moved forward, holding the lamp high. The circle of light pushed back the darkness, but barely. He could see perhaps 10 feet ahead. The rest was shadow. He reached the staircase, looked down into the entrance hall below. Empty. "This is an old house," he said aloud, trying to convince himself. Old houses make noise. But even as he said it, he didn't quite believe it. He returned to the study and closed the door. This time he locked it. Chapter 3. The Discovery. 3 days into his work, Elias had organized most of the doctor's financial records and was beginning to prepare his report. The estate was solvent, though not prosperous. After debts were settled and the remaining assets sold, the heirs would receive a modest inheritance. But the unexplained expenses nagged at him. He needed to account for every dollar. That was his job. And these payments, hundreds of dollars over the past 5 years, all vaguely described or not described, at all represented a significant portion of the estate's expenditures. He began searching more carefully through the desk drawers, looking for receipts, invoices, any documentation that might explain these transactions. That's when he noticed it. The desk had 3 drawers on each side, 6 total. But when he measured the depth of the drawers against the depth of the desk itself, something was wrong. The bottom right drawer wasn't as deep as it should be. He pulled it out completely, setting it on the floor. The interior of the desk space was lined with wood. He ran his fingers along the back panel and felt it move. Not much, just a slight give, as if the wood wasn't quite fitted properly. He pressed harder. With a soft click, the panel popped forward about an inch. Elias stared at it, his pulse quickening, a hidden compartment. He pulled the panel free and set it aside. Behind it was a space, perhaps 6, in deep running the width of the desk, and inside was a book. He lifted it out carefully. It was bound in dark leather, about the size of a standard ledger. The cover was worn, the edges frayed, no title or markings on the outside. He carried it to the desk and opened it. The first page was blank. The second page bore a single line of text in neat, precise handwriting. Private record. A Dubois, not for external review. Elias turned to the third page and felt the temperature in the room seemed to drop. It was a table, columns and rows, organized like any bookkeeper's ledger, but the contents. The first column was labeled name, the second T of acquisition, the third age at acquisition, the fourth initial assessment, the fifth treatment protocol, the sixth outcome, the seventh date of disposition. There were 37 entries, 37 rows, 37 names. Elias's eyes moved down the first column. Cecile, Etienne, Antoine, Josiah, Deline, Marie, Claire, Baptist Simeon, Elara, all first names only. He moved to the second column, dates ranging from 1839 to 1853. The third column, ages from 18 to 41. His hands were shaking as he moved to the fourth column, initial assessment. The first entry for Cecile, age 19, acquired April 1839. Subject presents in good general health, strong constitution, suitable for extended trials, cooperative temperament. The fifth column, treatment protocol for Seal Protocol 7. 3 cycles, observation period, 14 months. The sixth column, outcome terminated. February 1840. 1. Specimen preserved. Detailed notes in Journal 3. Elias felt his stomach turn. Specimen preserved. He forced himself to read the next entry. Aegean, age 23, acquired August 1839. Initial assessment. Subject shows signs of previous malaria infection. Interesting case for recovery trials resistant to instruction. Treatment protocol, Series B, Protocol 4 single extended trial. Observation 80 months outcome. Expired. April 1840 unusual complications. See Journal 4 for complete documentation. Expired. Elias turned the page. His breath coming shallow. More names, more dates, more clinical descriptions of human beings, like they were laboratory animals. Antoine, age 30. Excellent specimen. Rare opportunity for cardiac study. Josiah, age 15. Young subject, ideal for developmental protocols. Deline, age 28, childbearing age, suitable for maternal response trials. Every single entry ended the same way. Terminated, expired, deceased, disposed. No T1 marked as recovered, not one marked as released. Every single person named in this ledger was dead, and the dates of disposition. Elias checked them against the plantation's financial records. They corresponded exactly to some of those unexplained payments. To RC for consultation, the date matched the death of someone named Baptiste. To DM for discretion, the date matched the death of someone named Simeon. Payments for silence. Payments to dispose of bodies. Payments to keep terrible secrets. Elias closed the ledger, his hands trembling. Dr. Alistair Dubois hadn't been simply a plantation owner. He'd been conducting experiments, medical experiments on human beings, and this ledger was the record of every single one of his victims. Elias didn't sleep that night. He sat at the desk, the ledger open before him, reading every entry, every name, every terrible clinical description of what had been done to these people. Some entries were brief, others were detailed, referencing external journals that Elias couldn't find in the study. See Journal 8 for daily observations of subjects' response to elevated mercury doses. Refer to Surgical Notes, Volume 2 for complete documentation of procedure. Specimen tissue preserved in formalin. Location Sanctuary, Shelf 7. The word appeared multiple times. Sanctuary, a location where specimens were kept, where procedures were performed. Elias had explored most of the main house during his first days there. He'd seen the formal rooms on the first floor, parlor, dining room, drawing room, all dust-covered and unused. He'd walked past closed doors in the upstairs hallways, but he'd never seen anything that looked like a medical facility. Where was the sanctuary? He forced himself to keep reading. Around entry 23, he noticed something. A nudge in the handwriting. The earlier entries were neat, precise, almost elegant, but starting around 1848, the writing became more hurried, more erratic. Words crossed out and rewritten, margins filled with additional notes, and the tone changed. The early entries were clinical, detached, terrible, yes, but written with the cold precision of a scientist recording data. The later entries were different. Entry for someone named Gabriel, age 16, acquired March 1851. Subject resists all cooperation, required significant physical restraint. Initial treatments prove ineffective. Subject's stubbornness is remarkable, almost admirable. Protocol adjusted to test limits of human endurance under sustained duress. This one will break. They all break eventually. Outcome expired August 1851. Disappointing results. The strong ones always disappoint. Refer to Journal 14. The words were colder now, more cruel, as if Dubois had stopped seeing these people as subjects and started seeing them as obstacles, challenges, things to break. Entry 31. Someone named Ara, age 33, acquired January 1853. This subject is unusual. She looks at me with such intelligence, such understanding. She knows what is coming. I can see it in her eyes. It makes the work more interesting. Fear without understanding is common, but fear with full comprehension, that is rare. That is valuable data. Treatment protocol extended series D, multiple protocols simultaneously. This one can handle more outcome. Deceased September 1853. Extensive documentation available. One of the most complete studies to date. Specimen fully preserved. Elias felt sick. These weren't medical treatments. This wasn't research to help anyone. This was torture dressed up in scientific language. And Dubois had done it for 15 years. 37 people. 37 human beings who had suffered and died in this house. No, not in the house. In the sanctuary, wherever that was. Elias knew he couldn't remain in the study any longer. The walls felt like they were closing in. The air was too thick to breathe. He needed to get outside, to think, to decide what to do with this horrifying knowledge. It was barely dawn when he left the house through the kitchen entrance. The morning air was cooler than he expected, though still humid. Mist rose from the ground in thin wisps hovering over the fields that stretched behind the main house. He walked without direction, just needing to move to put distance between himself and that ledger locked in the desk drawer upstairs. That's when he saw her, an old woman, thin as a reed, her hair white and pulled back in a cloth wrap. She sat on the steps of a small cabin at the edge of the field, shelling peas into a wooden bowl. She looked up as Elias approached, her eyes sharp, despite her age. "You the bookkeeper," she said. Not a question, a statement. "Yes, Elias Thorne. I'm sorry to disturb you. I was just walking off a bad night." She nodded. "I can see it on you. The house does that sometimes, shows you things that make sleep impossible." Elias stopped, uncertain how to respond. The woman gestured to the step beside her. "Sit if you like. I'm Odette. Been here longer than anyone. Longer than even Mr. Sir Croft, though he likes to pretend otherwise." Elias sat, grateful for human company that didn't feel threatening. "You worked for Dr. Dubois, worked for this plantation, before Dubois ever came here." Her hands moved steadily, splitting peat pods with practice efficiency. "I was here when it belonged to the Bourgeois family. Good people, mostly. The doctor bought it from them in 1838. That's when things start, to change. Change how?" Odette was quiet for a moment. "Then you seem like a decent man, Mr. Thorne. So, I'll tell you plain, leave here. Finish your accounting as fast as you can and go. Don't ask questions, don't look too deep. Just do your work and leave." "Why?" She looked at him directly. "Because some soil is so poisoned that nothing good can grow from it. And this soil," she gestured toward the fields, "this soil has drunk too much suffering. You feel it, don't you? In that study, in those papers you're sorting." Elias felt his throat tighten. "What do you know about the doctor's work?" "I know he was a cruel man who called his cruelty science." Odette's voice was steady, but her eyes held old pain. "I know people came here and never left. I know there's a place on this property where terrible things happened. And I know that even though the doctor is dead, his shadow still hangs over Bel Rev like a curse." "The sanctuary," Elias said quietly. "Do you know where it is?" Odette's hands stopped moving. She looked at him with something between pity and fear. "You found something in the study. A ledger hidden with names. Dozens of names. Lord have mercy," Odette whispered. She set down the bowl and pressed her hands together. "I knew he kept records. Men like him always do. They need to document their sins. Like writing them down makes them legitimate. I need to know what happened to these people. The truth. The truth." Odette's laugh was bitter. "The truth is they suffered and died. That's the only truth that matters. But where? The ledger mentions. A sanctuary, a place where he kept specimens, where he performed procedures. The old infirmary. Odette's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, past the north field near the cypress grove. It was built before the doctor came, meant to care for the Piso, sick during yellow fever season, but Dubois converted it, made it his private workshop. No one was allowed near it, not even Croft. The doctor kept the only key. Elias felt his chest tighten. Is it still there? Building still standing, far as I know. But you shouldn't go there, Mr. Thorne. You really shouldn't. I have to. If I'm going to understand what's in that ledger, I need to see. You need to leave it alone. Odette's voice was suddenly fierce. She gripped his arm with surprising strength. That place is full of ghosts. Not the kind that rattle chains, but the kind that get inside your head and never leave. I've seen good men go in there and come out changed, hollowed out. Someone has to know. Elias said, if I just leave, if I finish my report and go back to Richmond and say nothing, then these people, their deaths mean nothing. They disappeared and no one cared. No one even knew their names beyond what's in that ledger. Odette studied his face for a long moment. Then she released his arm and reached into the pocket of her apron. She pulled out something small and pressed it into his hand. A key, old, rusted, but intact. The doctor thought he had the only one, she said, but the man who built that infirmary gave a spare to the head cook back in the Bazaar days. That key passed through hands over the years. It found its way to me. Why do you have it? Because I knew someday someone would need to bear witness. Her eyes were wet now. My sister was in that ledger, Mr. Thorne. Her name was Ara. She was taken in the winter of 1853. She told me she was going to the main house to clean, but she never came back. The doctor said she'd run away. He offered a reward for her return, but I knew she hadn't run. Elias remembered the entry. Ara, age 33, extended series D, eased, September 1853. Specimen fully preserved. I'm sorry, he whispered. Don't be sorry. Bear witness. That's all I ask. Go to that place, see what he did, and then make sure the world knows. Make sure it's not forgotten. She stood collecting her bowl of peas. Before she walked back into the cabin, she turned back once more. The sanctuary is locked from the outside. The doctor didn't want anyone wandering in, but he also didn't want anyone to hear what happened inside those walls. It's far from the main house, far from the fields, hidden by trees, hidden by trees. When you go and I can see you, we'll go at night. Croft patrols during the day. He mustn't see you there. Then she was gone, the cabin door closing softly behind her. Elias looked down at the key in his palm. He knew what he had to do. Elias waited until well after midnight. He'd spent the day forcing himself to continue with the regular accounting work, maintaining the appearance of normalcy. He ate dinner when it was brought. He answered Croft's few terse questions about his progress. He gave no indication that anything had changed, but everything had changed. He'd found additional references in the financial records. Purchases of medical supplies sent to alternate property address. Payments to a medical college in Charleston for specialized equipment. A regular expense labeled simply Maintenance North Facility. The north field where the cypress grove began, where the old infirmary stood. The sanctuary. At midnight, Elias, dressed in dark clothing, and slipped out of the study. The house was silent. He moved carefully down the stairs, avoiding the steps he'd learned would creak. He exited through the same kitchen door he'd used that morning. Outside, the night was moonless. Clouds covered the stars. The darkness was absolute. He'd brought a shielded lantern, one he'd found in a storage closet, and he opened the shade just enough to see a few feet ahead. The light seemed shockingly bright against the blackness. He moved north past the main fields. The ground here was uneven, marshy in places. His boots sank into mud. Insects sang in the darkness. Something splashed in the distance. A night bird or an animal in the swamp. After 20 minutes of careful walking, he saw it, a structure darker than the darkness around it. Single story, rectangular, isolated among the cypress trees, their gnarled roots breaking through the ground like skeletal fingers, the old infirmary. As Elias approached, he could see that the building was larger than he'd expected, perhaps 40 feet long, built of brick that had been stained black by years of moisture and moss. The windows were boarded over. The door was heavy wood banded with iron, and it was locked with a padlock that looked far newer than the building itself. Elias pulled out the key Odette had given him. It slid into the lock smoothly, turned with a soft click. The padlock opened. Elias removed it and pushed the door. It resisted at first, swollen from moisture, then gave way with a groan. The smell hit him immediately. Chemicals, decay, something sweet and nauseating underneath it all. He raised the lantern and stepped inside. The main room was larger than he'd expected, with a high ceiling and exposed beams, but it had been transformed into something that looked like a cross between a hospital ward and a workshop. Along one wall, shelves, dozens of them, filled with glass jars and bottles. In the lamplight, Elias could see that many of the jars contained things preserved in liquid organs, perhaps tissue samples. He forced himself not to look too closely. Along another wall, medical instruments laid out on a long table like a surgeon's toolkit, scalpels, saws, clamps, devices Elias couldn't even name, all metal and leather straps. In the center of the room, an examination table, metal with restraints at the corners. Dark stains covered its surface, and beyond that, a desk, papers, books, more of Dubois' meticulous record-keeping. Elias moved to the desk, his stomach churning. The lantern light cast strange shadows on the walls. The papers were organized in folders, each labeled with a name: Cécile, Etienne, Antoine, Josiah, Deline. The names from the ledger. He opened the first folder, Cécile, and immediately wished he hadn't. It contained daily observations, dated entries describing treatments administered, dosages, physical responses, symptoms written with the same clinical precision as the ledger, but more detailed. Much more detailed. Day 47. Subject shows marked deterioration of motor function. Tremors enhance persistent verbal communication, increasingly difficult, continue current. Protocol. Day 89. Subject non-responsive to external stimuli. Respiration shallow, reduced protocol to observe natural progression. Day 124. Subject expired at approximately 3 a.m., performed immediate autopsy. Findings: extensive damage to neurological tissue. Detailed documentation attached. Specimen preserved for long-term study. Elias closed the folder, breathing hard through his mouth to avoid the smell. He opened another étier, more of the same. Clinical observations of suffering, documentation of pain, administered in the name of research. Subject requires significant restraint during procedures. Vocalizations disruptive. Administered sedative, insufficient dosage. Increased amount. Subject unconscious for 14 hours. Respiratory depression noted, but subject recovered. Useful data regarding tolerance levels. Another folder. An Antoine. This subject possesses remarkable resilience. Extended trial. 7 to 3 weeks despite expectations of terminal outcome by day 12. Cardiovascular system shows unusual adaptation to sustained stress. Fascinating case. Prolonged observation warranted. Elias's hands shook as he set the folders down. This wasn't medicine, this wasn't even research. This was a man satisfying his curiosity by destroying human beings piece by piece, and he'd been doing it for 15 years in this room, in this horrible place he'd called a sanctuary. Elias forced himself to continue looking to document what he was seeing, because if he didn't, if he ran out of here right now and never came back, then Odette's sister and all the others would be forgotten. On the far wall he found more shelves. These held journals, leather-bound volumes numbered sequentially. Journal 1 through Journal 18. He pulled down Journal 14, The Sky, one referenced in the ledger entry for Gabriel. He opened it and read by lamplight. It was worse than the folders. It was day-by-day torture described in careful detail, with notes about what worked to cause maximum suffering, What broke a person's will fastest? What kept them alive longest while administering the most pain? This wasn't a doctor conducting research. This was a monster documenting his cruelty. Elias felt rage rising through the nausea, a cold, hard anger that pushed back the fear. These people had suffered, had died, and no one had known, no one had cared. But he knew now, and he could make sure the world knew, too. He began gathering documents, the folders, the journals. He found a canvas bag hanging on a hook, probably used to transport supplies, and filled it. He took photographs from the walls, daguerreotypes of the facility in its earlier days before Dubois had converted it. He took a small bottle from one of the shelves labeled with a chemical formula he didn't recognize as proof of the supplies stored here. And he took one of the instruments from the table, a scalpel in a leather case, because anyone who saw it would know what kind of work had been done here. When the bag was full, he took one last look around the room and noticed something he'd missed. A door in the back corner, partially hidden by one of the shelving units. He moved to it and pulled it open. The smell that rushed out was worse, much worse. Formaldehyde and rot. He raised the lantern. It was a small room, perhaps 10 feet square, and it was full of jars, dozens of them, hundreds, all labeled, all containing preserved specimens. Cardiac tissue, subject Antoine. Date March 1842, renal section, subject Josiah. Date October 1844, neurological sample, subject Deline. Date June 1847-9. Date June 1847. An entire wall was dedicated to these preserved pieces of human beings. Trophies, evidence, proof. Elias backed out of the room, pulling the door shut. He'd seen enough. More than enough. He turned to leave and froze. Through the open front door, he saw a light, a lantern, moving toward the building. Someone was coming. Elias doused his lantern immediately, plunging the room into darkness. His heart hammered against his ribs. He gripped the canvas bag tightly and moved quickly to the side of the doorway, pressing himself against the wall. The approaching light grew brighter. Footsteps on soft ground, heavy boots, a voice. "I know someone's in there. Might as well come out." Silas Croft. Elias held his breath. Croft's silhouette appeared in the doorway, backlit by the lantern he carried. The overseer stepped inside, raising the light to illuminate the room. "Place hasn't been opened in 6 weeks," Croft said conversationally. "Not since the doctor died. Lock's been secure this whole time until tonight." He moved further into the room, his eyes scanning the shelves, the examination table, the desk, so either a ghost opened that lock, or someone found a key they were never meant to have. He stood behind Croft, swallowed by shadow. If he could just stay still. "You won't be able to leave without passing me, Mr. Thorne, and I can be very patient." Croft turned. The beam of his lantern swept the room and caught Elias where he stood. Elias stepped forward into the light. There was no point hiding anymore. "How did you know I was here?" he asked. "I didn't," Croft replied calmly. "Not for certain, but I've been watching you. I saw your face when you left the house this morning. I saw you speaking with the old woman. I recognized the questions in your eyes." Croft placed the lantern on the desk. "I've seen that look before," he continued. "On every person who begins to understand what truly happened in this place." Elias's voice hardened. "You knew, all of it, what Dubois was doing." "I managed the property," Croft said evenly. "The doctor managed his research. We each stayed within our domains." "Research." Elias felt rage surge through him. "That's what you call it." Croft's expression did not change. "If you enjoy dark historical mysteries like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story that history tried to bury.